Okay, go ahead.
Hello, friends and gamers, and welcome to our analytical discussion about World War 1936 version 4. So we're processing ourselves through this whole thing. It's taken a little while because it's a hefty rule book. How many pages do you think it is?
I'll tell you here in a second.
So it's a hefty rule book.
109.
109 pages. And
now
it's
you can knock 9 of that right off the top. It's probably about 100 because there's some, like
glossary
like,
and such.
Yeah, glossary things like
introduction.
Introduction. Yeah.
But it's a hefty thing. So we're working our way through it a little bit, and we're on chapter 10. So it's taken us a while to get to this point. We could only do a video, I think, what is it, one every 3 weeks, something like that is when we're doing a video. So it's taken us
doing about
a while.
one. Well, this last week I was on vacation, so I was completely out of town. So it's just taking a little bit of time. And it's if you're not somebody who records videos, I don't think you appreciate how fatiguing they can be to sit here and talk for an hour and think for an hour and it actually is. I mean, I've had days off where I've been like, all right, I want to do like a half a dozen videos today. I get one video done and I'm like, all right, I got to take a break. I mean, you put on your game face, when you put on a video, and that it can get a little bit mentally draining.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Mental fatigue is a real thing. So,
no, that's right. Yeah.
It's doing videos is not it does take some effort, even when they're fun, it still takes some effort. Sometimes you just, you know what, I just got to watch TV I got to watch the next brainless Star Wars series, right. For a little bit to just like turn off and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Sure. Why not?
Yeah, so as always, we are just reading through this too. We don't have all the answers behind ourselves, and we're always learning too. So certain issues that we bring up one week might have been resolved by the next week that comes up. It's a constantly evolving thing. This thing is still in, say, the alpha or the beta stage of development, so it's not the official version just yet. So some of these things that we might come across certain things that we see concerning, but that's still subject to change, let's say, right? So
we've asked rules based on and gotten rules clarifications based on just doing these videos where you read through it, but then when you actually read through it, but then you talk about it, it goes, you kind of, a light bulb goes off and you're like, oh yeah, you know what, that is a good question. You go, you ask the question, you get an answer, it ends up in the next iteration of the rules, and it's okay, great, that's sure. And that's just between you and me, let alone other people watching this and maybe kind of picking up things that we're not. So they go and ask those questions, and then they end up as a kind of a clarification. And this is a good thing. This is absolutely a fantastic way to do this. I always recommend game companies in general do this. As a put it out, put a play test version out there.
I think so.
Like, Piazza did it for Pathfinder for like 2 years. They had a 2-year long play test window for Pathfinder second edition.
Yeah.
That's really impressive. They even released books saying, hey, look, this is the playtest book. For those who are really diehard, we're going to release the book. And it made what is now considered one of the best tabletop role-playing games out there right now. I can say that with a fair bit of confidence. That's not me just being a fanboy. I can back that up.
Yeah. I really appreciate that HBG released it to the public and gave us a chance to have a look at it and potentially, ask some questions to get more clarifications so that the book comes out even more, better than it was before. So I really appreciate that.
And the improvements, the clarifications to the rules, the improvements in way certain rules are described, the examples that have been added to kind of clarify how, okay, now it makes a little more sense. Absolutely fantastic. Every one of those has been a step in the right direction. So I think this is fantastic.
Okay, so this week we are dealing with combat phase. So it's chapter 10. So what we have been doing is kind of reading a bit and then commenting on if there's anything worth commenting. This one's a bit of a longer chapter, so we might have to split up into multiple parts, but we'll kind of see how far we get. Wintermute, you want to take it away and get us started?
Order of attacks. Resolve combats that were declared in the combat movement phase. The attacking player decides in which order the declared combats are resolved. Example. The German player has declared 2 combats: an attack on Western Ukraine and a strategic bombing at the airbase in Kiev. He chooses to resolve the strategic bombing combat first because he wants to eliminate the Soviet player's ability to scramble fighters from Kiev into the land combat in Western Ukraine. So already, and then I like this. I like the fact that they're actually showing what the actual what choosing the order of combats actually means, to, especially for newer players. That they go, because that light, it's kind of a light. Oh wait, if I can choose the order of combats, that means I can bomb that airfield and stop that from happening and kind of box it in.
That's right.
As opposed to just kind of doing it, right to left or whatnot.
That's
so
right.
I think it's good, especially for new players, that may take some time to kind of have that realization go off. I think it's good that example is worded the way it is.
Yeah.
When resolving a combat, the attacker and defender each place their units on their respective battle boards on the number that corresponds to their modified attack or defense values. Rolling the attack number or lower scores a hit. Units that have an opportunity to participate in multiple battles in a particular player's turn, i.e. scrambling, intercepting, escorting, etc., can only participate in 1 battle per player's turn. The only exception to this rule is blitzing. So, we're going to that particular caveat is going to be referred back to, especially when we get to scrambling, because of how scrambling is worded now. I already know that. That's an important thing to kind of point out.
Yeah. So did you want to tackle anything on this one? Is there anything that you need to address?
No, there are. This is one of those things, though I will say for newer players, order of attacks, like I was just saying with that example, is one of those things where the power of being able to choose the order of attacks as the attacker is something that is easy to miss. It is easy to not appreciate as a newer player and just kind of roll battles in whatever order. And it isn't until that you realize, oh wait, there's actual implications of the order in the order that I choose battles. So that's important for new players to kind of realize. The
only thing I would have as comment on this, and it might come up in the blitzing, which I just had a look there. It doesn't, but it might come up somewhere else, is what about if you have an attack going into a territory that's going to be blitzed into by a secondary force? So if you have attack force A goes into territory, captures that territory, but you have an attack force B is heading towards, let's say, Kiev, because why not, is heading towards Kiev. Can you wait with your secondary force until the attack force A completes its primary attack into this territory and then blitzes into the second territory? Is that something doable? Now, in our previous games, I don't even remember what we did. I don't think it comes up that often, but it's one of those things that probably could be addressed on this one, order of attacks.
And that,
like, just a single line saying blitzing happens after all regular attacks have occurred, maybe, or blitzing can happen at any stage.
And maybe this is almost like what I was talking with you before we started recording, where you have territory A, territory B, both being attacked, with both have units that can blitz. Okay, you resolve this combat, you declare a blitz into this territory. You resolve this combat, and then you declare a blitz into that same territory that the other units are blitzing. Now you say that's a combat that's going to take place, but now I put other units there. So I resolve this combat, and then this combat, where I've had it argued that blitzing happens immediately. Where you resolve this combat, you blitz, then you have to resolve that combat, which means that this unit, this force over here cannot meet up to help with that attack.
It boils down to, like, are you activating the units in that territory for the combat, or are you activating the territory for that combat, right? If you're activating the units, then you must subsequently blitz. But if you are activating just the territory for combat, then it should be somewhat optional, right? It really depends on what the designers want.
And I've always understood it to be, even in version 3, I've always understood it to be that because you choose the order of attacks, the order to resolve the combats in, regardless of whether a new combat pops up or not, because of the circumstances on the board, you still get to choose the order of those combats.
That's the way I see it too.
Case in point, you drop, now let's say that, take that exact same scenario, you then drop an airborne during the combat movement phase into that territory that you're going to blitz into. Okay, I choose the order of the attacks. Now, I think it makes sense that, okay, this guy resolves his combats, he moves his units. This guy resolves his combats, he moves his units. Then collectively, all three of those prongs come together into that attack. I think historically that makes sense. Mechanically, that makes sense. And it does jive with the core concept of order of attacks. Where, you know, you have other things going on all at once. And then this is part of what Blitzkrieg was about, you know, or Speerpunkt was about, it was about kind of having troops doing, you know, coming together at the exact right time and timing everything in such a way that, you know, you're bringing all of your firepower to bear, and you're not just, okay, those tanks go take that. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, now we're going to drop some airborne. Oh, that didn't work. Well, now this other unit's going to, or this other area is going to blitz in there and take that. Okay, that did finally work. So that's so I would prefer it to be like the way I've initially
understood it. And I see it the same way as you do, and I think most people do. Like, I've never come into conflict with anybody that said otherwise, but it's been one of those things that have crossed my mind before. It's like, it's not clear 100%, and so therefore, because it's not clear, perhaps it should be addressed with a one line in here too, right? Just to make it clear and say, you know, if you have the circumstance that force is going to continue on blitzing, you can choose to wait to do that until whatever time of the game you want to. And it makes sense too, thematically, from a 6-month time period. You could say, you know, this one pushes forward, but this one was only going to start to engage 4 months in, something like that. So I believe that's the designer's intent, but I don't want to step on what they intended or not. You know, for all I know, I've been playing it wrong for many, many years. So maybe it's worthwhile, you know, the designer's putting in a line there saying otherwise. Okay, next on we have special abilities. So this covers the abilities that exist in the previous game by quite a bit, though. There's going to be first strike, which units can fire before the first round of combat. Air superiority, which is a first round thing where you have to take air casualties on the first round of combat. Carpet bombing, they've clarified a little bit more, saying, I mean, they did.
Speaking of rules that have been misplayed. I know this one's been misplayed commonly, and you know, Crimson Tide was no exception to that. And even the player who had the information on how it was supposed to be properly played, because he had contact with the designer, said, "Hey, I know this is jacked up and confusing and very, and a lot of people get this wrong." And we all walked it back. He's like, "Hey, take it back, and now that you understand how it works better, not a problem."
Fair enough.
Carpet bombing is just an example of that.
No, it's nice that they clarified it quite a bit, because I'm sure it existed in the previous rules in some, you know, scattered formation, but it's nice that they combine it all here together to really explain what it all means. So carpet bombing, strategic bombers that participate in an attack against land units in the land zone engage in carpet bombing. They only participate in the first combat round. Only land units can be attacked by carpet bombing. So I would say that line should be first, right? You know, only land units can be attacked by carpet bombing. Facilities are attacked via strategic bombing. The only defending units that are able to return fire on attacking bombers are anti-aircraft, anti-AA, and fighters. After the first combat round is resolved, surviving attacking bombers immediately move to a suitable landing spot. So I think that clears it up quite nicely. It doesn't really leave any questions to be asked. I'm sure there's, once, you know, the theoretical side of things is passed and people get into the practical aspects, certain issues will come up, but I can't see any questions from that one.
Yeah, I'm glad it's here. I'm also glad that they added attrition attacks.
Yeah, so I don't know if attrition attacks showed up in the previous game. I know. Yeah, I don't.
I think there were clarifications to the rules around. I've asked directly for clarification about attrition attacks and moving before an attrition attack. Here they clarify that attrition attacks they've been adjacent to since the beginning of the player turn.
No, this is different than cross-border raids, attrition attacks, right? I mean, in my mind it is, and so I don't know.
No, that's a border. You're thinking of a border clash.
Border clash, yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, cross-border raid.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Border clash, whatever. So attrition attacks, I don't know if it showed up in version 3.
Yeah, well, not in this section. There were attrition attacks from advanced artillery.
Were there in version 3?
Oh yeah, advanced artillery had attrition attacks. So did the strategic rockets.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, I suppose so.
Yeah,
I don't remember them being used at all.
But there was it didn't clearly state that the unit had to start adjacent to the territory. So the question was, well, okay, they spend a movement point. Okay, well, first off, can they use all their movement and then do an attrition attack? Or does it cost a movement point to do an attrition attack? So they move one and then they still have movement left, so they just do an attrition attack. Here they explicitly state they need to start next to the territory.
Right.
They need to remain there. It's
there.
So
in this case, I don't know if rockets are not considered that, because they say advanced artillery can make attrition attacks on land zones that are adjacent.
Well, the new strategic rockets don't have attrition attacks anymore.
Combat lasts for 1 round only. Attrition attacks are unaffected by terrain modifiers. Defending units cannot return fire. So my thinking on this one is, perhaps it's appropriate for another section, is I think all combat should be affected by terrain modifiers, regardless of what it is. Just a blanket statement across the board. Attrition attacks, shore bombardment, everything should be affected by by terrain modifiers. Just my personal take on things, because I think how should an attrition attack against using artillery against a mountainous area should have just the same amount of effect as actual combat occurring in that area. Now somebody will probably respond and say, well, it's factored into the dice rolls and the combat values that they can hit for attrition modifiers. You don't want them to be completely useless, right? Like if the attrition attack is a 1, then combat modifiers, well, there's other ways of getting around it. Say minimum of 1 for any attrition attacks, something like that.
No, I understand what you're saying, though. For consistency, there is an argument to be made that all combat attack dice, and it's the exception when they're not modified, and there could be 1 or 2 exceptions out there, because that's just that unit's special ability, or whatever the case is. But I know I've talked with you directly about why aren't aircraft affected by like mountain terrain? I've never understood that, because with today's modern aircraft, mountainous terrain is still a pain in the ass. With all the modern technology we have, mountain terrain is still a pain in the ass for air power to deal with.
That's right.
It would have been no different back then. So I think it would nerf a little bit of the air power aspect of things.
Sure.
That's a different discussion.
Well, and we could even say, let me just add to that different discussion. Shore bombardment should effectively be the same thing. It's like, okay, so you're attacking a mountainous island, like, I don't know, the Philippines or whatever, in this case, or a mountainous coastline. You could hide your troops on the reverse slope of that mountain, and now the shore bombardment, it's going to be somewhat affected by going, hitting straight down, but it's not going to be, you can protect against that to some extent.
I'll play devil's advocate and say shore bombardment is already a very abstract concept. And it's already abstracted to the point where you are at a point where the modifiers are already taking into account the fact that it's already 1 round. There's a limit on how many can even do it based on the number of units on the ground. So it doesn't. So it's not like one guy lands and you get 5 free shots. Kill stuff. So there already are limitations there. But again, I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Sure. I think it's just sufficient to say
like it is.
I'd say a blanket statement across the entire board for simplicity. Combat modifiers affect all kinds of combat, regardless of what it is. Anytime you roll a dice, if there's a terrain modifier there, it gets affected. Let's move on. So anti-aircraft artillery got some pretty hefty, not reworking, but redefining of what it all does.
Well, it got a clarification.
It did.
And I remember I had a discussion with somebody who I asked clarify, who knew the rules. I asked, hey, I have 3 different ways that I can immediately see how to resolve these die pools. And I got 3 different answers as to, well, all 3 of those will work. I'm like, I don't want to know what all 3, of course, all 3 will work. Mathematically and statistically, they all work with varying degrees of median effects or, average effects and whatnot. What do the rules say? What do the rules say? What do the rules tell me to do? You got to pick one. They finally picked one. And clarified, this is how, thank God.
That's good. Thank
God.
I like it,
And so they added a chart, which makes it pretty simple. And a chart that even though it doesn't, you might have more than 3 pieces of artillery in an area, but you can extrapolate. You can extrapolate how, you can continue, you logically follow the way the chart flows. And yeah, I think this is a good clarification. This is an excellent clarification. There's one way the rules work, and I'm sure there are people who are going to house rule it, and that's okay. But at least everybody who comes to the table knows that, well, this is where we're playing from, unless we say otherwise.
Yeah, it always puzzles me is like certain things, because I'm designing my own thing, is like certain things are obvious when you write the rules. Like, of course, no one's going to take it any other way. But then you get to situations like this, like, you know what? Yeah.
And then you hand it off to people and you're like, holy crap.
Yeah. It's like, are these people idiots or am I the idiot? Right. Or not, maybe that's too extreme terminology, but it's like, I thought I had it figured out. I thought, I understood, and I'm speaking about myself in regards to my board games. Like, I thought I had it all figured out.
I've been in the same boat. Absolutely. I've been in the same boat numerous times when I try to design a game.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's but it's good to keep that in mind as a game designer and as somebody who plays games who has no experience with designing. And and I've challenged people who get pissy with game designers. It's like, okay, well, if an issue comes up, and then they immediately go from being, hey, how do we resolve this, to complete asshole. That's not right. Yeah. Okay, whoa, man, this may be the very first time that they're realizing there's an issue with the interaction of those two rules, or there's a very, very specific caveat that they missed, or they just forgot to type it in there. Don't be a dick. Okay, now if they're going to tell you to piss off, or you're an idiot, or it's not my responsibility to balance the game, it's your responsibility to balance the game as the player, then you've got a reason to be an asshole.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, but take a deep breath, calm down. Okay, just ask. They probably have already, you may or may not be the first person to ask this, and if you're not, the answer is probably out there, and they're probably, oh yeah, we know there are a couple of issues. And again, I've seen this with other board games where they will pepper the internet with erratas and whatnot, and they will ask for player feedback. Hey, something came up we didn't catch in play testing. Here's a temporary fix. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
That's perfectly reasonable, but don't go from zero to dickhead because there's an issue with the rules.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing that slipped my mind is that in special abilities, they have first round of combat, and they actually categorize that. And now they have all rounds of combat. So that's nice that they kind of break it down too in that level. And I missed that the first read through. Target selection. So I think we all know how target selection works. It's basically you get on a certain roll, you can select certain units to attack. So target selection may also be limited to a specific class or type of unit, vehicle unit or land unit, naval class. So that you see in tank destroyers, if they roll, 1 to 3, then they could hit vehicle class units. Now, my thinking then was, well, what if with the tank destroyers before, it's like, okay, what if there's no vehicle class units? Can they still target select outside of that pool of vehicle class units? I like that they extend it here and say limited to a specific class or type of unit that you are forced. Because I was thinking like, okay, so you have target selection at 1 to 3. Are you forced to hit vehicle class units? Or if there's no vehicle class units, now is it just treated as like a regular combat, or can you use your target selection against infantry or whatever else, right?
And it's worth noting for somebody who's brand new that it says the opposing player would choose. Now, I know somebody in 3rd edition misread this section, and they said, oh, okay, well, I scored it on, we'll say tank destroyer. I scored a hit on 1 through 3, so you have to take a casualty out of a vehicle class unit. It's like, no. If I've got a medium armor and a heavy armor, I'm the one who scored the hit. I'm going to pick the heavy armor, as opposed to, well, you have to, let's say you've got cavalry, medium, and heavy. Well, it's the defender. Well, okay, now I have to take that casualty within that class. I take the casualty as a cavalry. No, that's not how that works. The person who scored the hit chooses, meaning it's very, very, it can be very, very devastating given the circumstances when you score that hit. Because if you know you're going to be fighting a long round of combats, and that there's an important distinction there. Because it's like, okay, well, you're chewing up cavalry or mechanized, but you don't realize you can be knocking out his armor, his heavy armor, and this combat's going to go 5 rounds. Well, that's 4 less rolls of the heavy armor. That can have a big impact.
It can, absolutely. And it's one of those things that infantry fighting in a city zone, they get target selection against vehicles. If I remember correctly,
Vehicle class, yeah.
Vehicle class. So yeah, that can be really devastating.
Cities very potentially, especially if you're rolling a big handful of dice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and you saw that was part of my goal with the defense of France in
right.
Crimson Tide, is I tried to maximize the number of dice I would be rolling for the defense of France, hoping to just roll ones.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I took quantity over quality in hopes I would roll ones and get a little lucky. I don't think it happened, but get a little bit of lucky. Yeah, but that's okay. I knew that was a calculated risk in how I chose to play it out.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're running out of time here for our first little part, so let's call it a break here now. Have a commercial break and come back for retreating from combat.
Okay, today's commercial break is brought to you by... I can't think of something.
Depends.
It depends on what.
Depends the diapers. For those very passionate gamers
who don't want to leave the computer during a gaming session. Dude. All right, I'm stopping this. I'm stopping this. This has gotten out of hand. All right, I'm recording.
All right, we're back. So we left off at retreating. We wanted to talk about retreating. Yeah. So retreating from combat can primarily just be done by the attacker. I think only can be done by the attacker, except in perhaps... No, I don't think there's any circumstance. I was thinking maybe in regards to scrambling, but I think even in scrambling, that doesn't really work, does it?
Well, here it says, let's see, land units must retreat to an adjacent friendly land zone. At least one attacking unit must have come from that zone. Retreating units can retreat to more than one zone if desired. This is also kind of one of those caveats that I think once you get used to the game, you'll see the value in this.
Yeah, that's right. Now, so this is something, sorry, go on.
This discussion has come up very recently on Discord, where people have said, look, if I attack from here and I attack from here, and there's these two zones don't border each other at all, and I attack here and I attack from here, and then it goes badly, or I had no intention of going more than one round, and then I declare a retreat, but then all the units from this zone went from this zone over, retreat from this zone to this zone. So it allows me to kind of leapfrog a zone. And the designer said that he thinks it is so, and I'm paraphrasing, that it's so rare it's not really something worth worrying about.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So one of the things that I did in Axis and Allies 1940 is if you wanted to weaken Yugoslavia so that Italy could capture it, that was the routine, is have your units in southern Germany attack Yugoslavia and weaken them with one round of combat. You don't go in there in full bore. You just go enough that you take off a slice of their units and maybe leave only one or two Yugoslavian units left over and retreat everybody to Romania. And that was my standard play, and a standard play for a lot of people there. And it came up, like, I saw it come up many games. Now it came up more virtually than everywhere else. Like, I played a bunch of games virtually, and that was a standard play. Now in person, it's a little bit less, you don't see it as much because for whatever reason, people didn't play it as much physically, but it was one of those things that I saw quite a bit. So I could see it happening in this circumstance. You attack one territory, take off a few units, and retreat to somewhere else. Let's say if the forces there's been a landing in France and you want to attack it, but you want to, for whatever reason, you want to get past it to the other side, something like that, right? There's different things you could do. So,
and you know what, I think that now, if you are like me and you are generally you generally want a lot of historical realism, my knee-jerk reaction is I don't like that decision. However, I defend that position as, okay, that's a reasonable choice to make. Right. I think the retreat rules could be rewritten with a paragraph, and it would take a paragraph to clarify it, and examples to clarify, where that you can only retreat to a zone that was where attackers came from if that zone is adjacent to the zone that they originally came from, or some kind of wording like that. Now that is quite a bit to add. That is quite a bit to add, and I'm shrinking it down very simply right there. It's a lot to add. Now, as a game designer, to say, I don't think this is worth the effort. I think is okay in this instance.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's okay. And it's going to come up so rarely, it's not that big of a deal. And if it does come up rarely, it can be house ruled. And if it becomes a common house rule, well, that's a sign that maybe added, or in version 5, they need to address it again within 20 years when we're playing version 5.
Yeah.
And I think that's another cool thing to look for, just real quick diversion. If it's a very common house rule, then it's probably a rule worth adding to the game.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, exactly.
And I think this is one that might end up being in that category in the future.
Well, I could see it being used quite a bit, say, by the Chinese forces. Like, okay, I'm going to attack the Japanese here, 1 round of combat. Then I'm going to retreat to the opposite side and reinforce that territory. It's kind of one of those things that when the objective isn't to capture that territory, but to reinforce somewhere else. Or to weaken them sufficiently in one territory or another. Anyways, it's interesting, right?
It can backfire.
It can,
It can backfire because they could just score a ton of successes on their defense roll.
That's right.
And gut your forces. Totally. And like, wow, this did not work as well as I had hoped.
Yeah.
So there is also that factor as to, is it really that big of a deal that worth worrying about?
Yeah, that's right.
And there is some risk involved. So I think that's another fair argument to just leave it like it is.
Yeah. Personally, I'm okay with leaving it as it is because it adds an extra level of complexity, let's say, right? And decision choices to the opponent is like, oh, this is one of in your strategic tool belt of things that you can do. And maybe it's not a great option, but it's an option as well. And sometimes having those strategic tools are nice. So yeah. Anyways, aircraft and landings which attacked from adjacent land zones may retreat while amphibiously assaulting airborne. Okay. So, I don't know where we left off. My apologies there. I just
okay. Attacking. Okay. Well, let's just back up. Attacking units will retreat prior to the beginning of the next combat round. A continuing force may be forced to retreat following a continuing force. That we're talking explicitly about screening. Forces may be forced to retreat following a lost screening battle. Retreating units cannot be moved again in non-combat movement. A player who chooses to retreat must retreat with all their units in that battle. That's an important caveat. Exception: aircraft and land units which attacked from adjacent land zones may retreat while amphibiously assaulting. Airborne assaulting units are forced to remain.
For me, I find that's a little bit difficult because the exception doesn't seem to be a sufficient exception. Let me say 2 things here. A continuing force should be italicized or in bold, just for the reader's benefit, right? To let you know that that's not a verb. Continuing force is not necessarily a verb. It's a noun. It's an object. It's a force. It's an entity in its own right. It's not a verb. Continuing force, right? Same thing with lost screening. Retreat following a lost screening. What? Battle? It doesn't say battle, so that should be touched up there.
That should probably be clarified.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So a player who chooses to retreat must retreat all their units with the exception of aircraft and land units which attacked from adjacent land zones may retreat while amphibiously assaulting airborne assaulting units are forced to remain. So what about in the situation like, okay, so what if I had some land forces that are attacking a territory and amphibious units that are attacking a territory as well? What about in that circumstance? Is my aircraft allowed to retreat then, or is everything allowed to retreat then? It's one of those things that it leaves a lot of questions to be answered. So I'd say exception, aircraft. I don't actually know what I would even write. What are your thoughts?
I don't see why airborne units can't retreat once they've been airborne dropped. I mean, that absolutely happened.
But
happened.
What if you drop airborne units into Alsace-Lorraine in kind of central France? It's all Axis occupied territory around there.
Well, then they don't have any option to retreat because there's no place to retreat to.
Okay, fair enough.
So when I say retreat, I mean they still have to follow all the other rules of retreat.
Okay, that works.
And again, now this goes back to what I was talking about with the hopping thing, where you can make it more realistic and give players more options and lighten the burden of this kind of all or nothing way that the rules chose to written as far as this goes. But it's going to take a bit more explanation on how it works.
Sure.
I have no problem. I don't see any reason why amphibiously assaulting units cannot retreat back to their transports.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, sure.
Even if you wanted to offer penalties to doing it or whatnot, make it a little more stringent or strict.
Yeah.
It's okay. I don't have a problem with that either. And there are historical examples of this.
I think
the most famous is probably, in a lot of ways, you could argue that the why can't I think of it? The evacuation of the British expedition, Dunkirk. Yeah, why can't I think of that? You could argue that while there was a combat going on around the edges, there was. Now there was a lot of stop and go. There's a lot to unpack there, but in general, you could argue that those are units that are retreating from their defensive units that are in fact retreating from combat onto amphibious or transport vehicles.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't see a problem with that. Although I don't see a problem with that as a concept to add to the game. Although again, it's going to be quite a chunk of writing, and it's going to take a lot of effort to clarify it.
Well, you could always just say all units may retreat. There's one way of doing it, unless you want to make some exceptions, as in they take extra round of combat or something like that. I don't think it would need that much writing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of bizarre situations that arise, though, in that instance, because I have sat down and written this for a project I was working on.
Yeah.
I still am working on it. It's just taking a back burner.
There are some, like, for instance, let's say you're retreating from combat, so can you retreat infantry that attacked a territory into the sea zone that you had Marines coming out of, right? Something like that. You could have bizarre situations like that. And
again, I don't actually see a problem with that.
Yeah, you'd have to kind of rewrite the other one saying attacking units must retreat to the territories they came from, and that would resolve that issue, and then you could retreat everybody to where they come from. But the idea there is, like, what if you have a coastline and the front is somewhere over here, and then they're dropping off like a secondary force to try to, like, surround them in some sense, or diversionary second attack on the flank, something like that, right? Should they have the rights, these Marines have the rights to bypass this entire force over here to retreat to the left? I don't know.
And again, in a game of this scope, they generally don't get that deep into it. They just say it's a combat.
Yeah.
However, as far as options go, and the tactical nitty gritty of it is not something that is generally taken into account. But for that same reason, I don't see why they can't retreat onto transports. And I don't see why airborne can't retreat as well.
Yeah,
via ground, not via air transport, via ground. But again, this is me. I admit it's a me thing talking right now, as opposed to the argument is absolutely valid. That's like, look, we could have went this route. We chose to take it a little more straightforward, all or nothing kind of route with playing the core game, and that's okay. In this,
and that's what I was thinking.
Instance, I think that makes sense.
They wanted to make D-Day and the other amphibious invasions. They wanted to make them risky. It's like, okay, you fired your bolt, you attempted to make a landing. Now you have to pull back, recover for a bit, and see how things look a few rounds from now. So I kind of like it in that sense, and also, but maybe it is a bit too complex in this circumstance. Should I move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Aircraft may only retreat limited to their remaining movement points. Map may only retreat their patrol range, otherwise it's eliminated. That one's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make it, it splashes in the ocean or wherever, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
Surface ships must retreat to adjacent sea zone. At least one attacking ship must have come from that zone. Retreating units can retreat into more than one zone if desired. So surface ships retreating works basically just like land units retreating.
Yeah.
Defending submarines must always submerge after the first round and stay in the sea zone. Submerging lasts for the rest of the attacking player turn.
So this thing about submarines, I think it clashes a little bit with the first paragraph saying attacking units may retreat prior to the beginning of the next combat round, continuing force, etc., etc. So reading that first paragraph, you think, okay, so attacking units are the only ones that could retreat, and here we have defending submarines may always submerge at the first.
But that's just an exception.
It is the exception.
That's just an exception, yeah. And submarines have always been rules heavy.
Yeah, it's
because
true.
there's a lot of special things about submarines. So this is just so you understand the core concept that applies to 90% of the units on the map. But then you have that one unit that does that one weird thing that is handled a different way, and for the most part, I think that's not an issue. So long as you don't get 1,000 exceptions for 1,000 different units, you're okay.
My thing is though and I know rule books are going to be very difficult to design, but ideally a rule book will be designed that if you work cover to cover, it's going to be things that you progress as your knowledge progresses. You don't have to go and backfill certain aspects of what you know. So it's one of those things that you want to work your way through it like this and not come across certain things that fill in the holes here that you didn't realize, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. And it is, there's a couple ways to handle that. And the simplest way is when you establish this is how this will always work as a baseline. Then you add one or two more sentences that said, however, be aware there are exceptions to this. And then you give a little blur. Then you give the actual section of the rule book that points to that section. I think that's probably the simplest. Okay, I now moving forward know somewhere, even if I don't jump to it and read it, I just keep on reading linearly, that there are, I'm going to have to understand that this is not an always thing. There's one or two exceptions out there.
That's right, yeah. Okay, moving on. Now we got scrambling into combat. So I'm going to give a brief overview of it. So air bases allow you to scramble. This is a recent addition in version 3 that they would allow you to scramble. Our fighters are the only ones who can do it. And if you have at least one defending unit in the facility. So one of the things that this asks, I would say, is, okay, is a defending unit part of your alliance or part of your nation?
Alliance.
Yeah. But see, alliance. I would have said nation. So if you had, say, 3 British fighters sitting in Paris and the Germans attack Picardy, it's like, okay, and there's only French units in Picardy. It's like, oh, so can the British scramble to that thing? It doesn't state it here.
I think that will get clarified a little bit more in the airbase section. I think. Fair enough. But I've asked that question myself. And I did was clearly, and I see no reason why it changed from version 3 to version 4.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah. Okay.
And it does historically again make sense.
It does make sense. Absolutely. Yeah. It's just one of those things that, because we're talking about it, perhaps should be.
That's fair. And that's, again, for newer players who may be watching this, it is worth it to mention some of this stuff.
Yeah. So seaplane bases allow its owners to send up to 3 seaplanes into combat into adjacent sea zones. So that's interesting as well, that if you have 3 French or British or USA seaplanes sitting in British seaplane base, you can't scramble those.
Seaplane base allows its owner to send up to.
So same thing would apply for air bases, right? If you have 3 British fighters sitting in the Paris air bases allow its owner to send up to 3 fighters into combat. So in that case, they can't.
Air bases allow its owner to send up to 3 fighters into combat into adjacent land. Okay. I don't think it's meant to be. Okay, if I've got an American fighter at a British sea base or a British air base, there's absolutely no reason why, with the British player's permission, I should not be able to take that American fighter.
Yeah. I guess
think maybe it's worded this way to make sure that it's the owning player's choice, because the American player may say, hey, I'm ready to scramble both those fighters into that fight. The British player goes, wait, I want to save those 3 scramble slots for my fighters later, or something.
I think you're right, because they would have said air bases allow its owner to send its own 3 fighters, or something like that. So I think you're right. It's like the airbase owner gives permission to send up to 3 fighters into combat. So something like that.
Now, if I'm wrong on that,
and
that's a whole nother discussion that we need to have. And I think that does not jive with what I know elsewhere is in the rules and clarifications that I've got from version 3 that I don't see any reason why they would change from version 3 to version 4.
I like how they put in here, air bases allow its owner to send 3 fighters. Seaplanes allow its owner to send up to 3 seaplanes into combat where there's at least 1 defending unit or contains enemy transports attempting an amphibious assault. I like that, because it's like an odd exception, right?
Well, seaplanes can kill transports.
Yeah, but it says like, oh, you're not scrambling into combat in the case of the transports, right? Because there
Correct.
might not be a combat there. So they were diligent, and kudos to the designers that they did a good job of this too, where they actually put in one line saying, if there are enemy transports attending an amphibious assault, you can still scramble there, even though there's no combat in that.
You're preventing the combat,
yeah,
you're as opposed to but it also does make sense because seaplanes would be it actually clearly states that seaplanes have a use beyond just sub hunting in this particular instance. They can be used to go and I've done devil's advocate with seaplanes before about being transport hunters. Which I think I've had that discussion with you, in defense of seaplanes in version 3, but they still weren't really defendable.
Yeah. They're interesting units for sure. Okay, major ports, dockyards, and shipyards allow its owner to send up to 3 surface ships in port into combat in adjacent sea zones where it has at least 1 defending unit or which contains enemy transports attempting an amphibious assault. So again, that covers their back in regards to the transports, but also is interesting about because it's a new addition, right? With major ports, dockyards, and shipyards.
Yeah, and when we get to that particular spot, and I really do want to hear feedback from people who I know are playtesting it right now, even though they don't have the version 4 map. They're playing on the version 3 map with these rules. And I really am curious to see, because I don't have time. Unfortunately, I don't have time to do that. I really am curious to see how drastically import out of port changes the name.
Yeah, that's right. How it was. That's a potential big game changer. So one thing that this brings to mind is, okay, major ports, dockyards, ambiguous, and shipyards, ambiguous. Now, I don't know for certain, do they have minor shipyards, or is it just like they do in version 3, minor and major?
Pretty sure they do.
Okay, so in this case, I'm assuming that it's all dockyards and all shipyards allow its owner to send up to 3 surface ships.
Yes. Now, ports are the smallest of the 3.
Right, but again, it might say major ports, dockyards, and shipyards. Maybe it's
minor
implying
ports cannot scramble at all, I think is what it's saying.
Right, but maybe it's implying just by that major ports, dockyards, and shipyards, tying them together, or maybe it's saying major ports, dockyards, and shipyards. You know what I mean? Like, it really depends on how you emphasize or how you say the word out loud, essentially.
Yeah, you know what? That is actually that's actually a good point. Let's shoot, I forgot what page it was on.
Yeah. My first reading of that, you're looking into it. Able to be in port,
airbase, minor port, scramble, no. Major port, up to 3 surface warships. Dockyards, scramble, no. Up to 3 surface ships. Okay, so you are correct. You are actually correct that probably should be clarified to read, because there's minor dockyards, and it would be very easy to read that section and assume that minor dockyards can scramble up to 3. That's actually a good catch.
Okay. All right, cool. So that's an interesting feature. Submarine bases allow its owner to send up to 3 submarines in port into combat in adjacent sea zones where it has at least 1 defending unit or contains enemy transports. So again, a nice thing. Nothing to comment on submarine bases. I don't think there's any other types of naval bases. I think that's it, eh? For some reason, I thought they missed. Yeah.
No, that should cover that.
Okay. Yeah.
There are submarine bases allow. Oh, and it is worth noting. It is worth noting that when you are scrambling ports, dockyards, and shipyards, major shipyards and major dockyards, it specifically says surface ships. You cannot scramble subs from those. You actually need a separate submarine base to be able to scramble subs. That is because, and I already see people making that mistake inadvertently.
That's right.
I know I could very easily have made that mistake if I had not read it here. I probably will. I'll probably forget I had this discussion, and I will.
So one question is, surface. Can you scramble your transports?
Surface up to 3 surface ships.
It's worth looking, but this
it says surface ships. It doesn't say anything about warships.
because I could see it being a little tweak, and it rarely come up. I could see it being as a potential exploit.
I know there have been a ton of questions about scrambling from ports and the various iterations of that I cannot summarize.
It's a new feature, yeah.
Yeah, that I cannot summarize.
Radar technology allows your heavy fleet carriers to scramble up to 3 fighters into combat in adjacent land or sea zones, which at least is one defending unit or facility, or which contains enemy transports attempting an amphibious assault. In addition, if radar technology is developed, bases and major naval facilities may scramble an unlimited number of units. So here they emphasize, bases and major naval facilities. So here they emphasize that major naval facilities would be the ones that could scramble unlimited, but it does not necessarily mean that the minor dockyards and shipyards, judging by this, wouldn't be able to scramble at least 3. Okay, so that's cool. I like the scrambling rules behind this. I think they're really quite nice.
And they're going to have a lot bigger impact on things, especially that naval aspect of things.
It'll give it more of a fluid type of game as opposed to like the whole your turn to go and then things kind of stop, and then your turn to go. It adds a little bit more ebb and flow. Okay, units present from nations aligned with an owner of the facility may be part of the scramble units from that facility. Okay, so there's that answer.
That answers that, yeah.
I have read this beforehand, just before we started that.
Yeah, but you know what? It's worth mentioning, and I've done this from various one edition to the next edition for like Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah.
For example, that when I used to play that.
Right.
You gloss, you read a certain discipline ability for the particular clan you're playing, and you're used to first edition, you read the second edition rules, and you glance through them real quick, and it seems to work exactly the same way. What you miss is it's been worded differently,
right?
And if you miss that, you're going to be playing it the old way. And I think that can very easily, I'll tell you right now, it's going to happen to a lot of players when they read these rules, and it's not, there's nothing you can do about it other than remind yourself to be very focused when you're reading the rules. Maybe even read them out loud. That helps you pay attention to the wording better, and kind of remind yourself, hey, don't take anything for granted. Don't assume it works the same way.
That's right. So unlike one comment here about scrambling is aircraft, they have to return to a safe landing spot, if they're scrambling to the sea zone. Ships, I assume, don't have to move back to their port that they scrambled from. So just I don't think noting.
It's units for I don't think ships do return automatically, do they?
No, they don't. No.
Okay, that may not even be an option.
No, I don't
think it is either. After the combat phase, surviving scrambling units return to their originating location. If the original location is no longer available because it was destroyed or captured, then scrambled units are eliminated.
Where are you looking at that?
Sorry. The very last paragraph right before we go into land combat.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Scrambling aircraft does not count on going on map. Okay, that actually does answer the question we were just talking about.
Yeah, so I thought that had a relation to the example here about aircraft.
Again, this should probably be put up before the examples.
I tend to skip the examples because I think I have a sufficient grasp of this. But yeah, that's one of the core rules, I guess, of scrambling, because that means ships. Like, okay, so I was reading this example about the USA moves into sea zone P16. Like, all right, so now we're going to have a nice fleet that the Japanese scramble out to P16 and the Americans can jump down on it. So it might be one of those things that you don't want to do. But with this scrambling ability of ships to come out of port, battle, and then retreat back into port, that is interesting. And I also assume
however, let's say you for whatever reason, you scramble your entire fleet. But then let's say this fleet has some big heavy hitters in it. It's got like 3 battleships in it, along with some support ships. You have your naval combat, but then they lose the port they came from. Yet all those ships are still there, but they're eliminated because they don't have a port to go back to.
Yeah, well, there's that possibility.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't. That's my gut instinct. Is I don't know whether I agree with that. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
the ships just go. They're not like fighters. We understand why fighters can get lost because they got nowhere to land. But ships go out, they engage, they look behind themselves, and they go, "Oh crap, guys, we're completely scuttled because the port's gone."
Yeah,
I mean, you're going to scuttle 3 battleships because they lost maybe a very
No,
very,
I get you.
or they knew they were going to. Now maybe there's a rationale behind it. Maybe this is just an oversight at this point. That no, we really didn't intend it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's a lot of.
But maybe it plays into this idea too. Okay, so you're defending us. Tokyo, Japan is a good example. You're defending Tokyo. You have all your ships are in port in all these different spots. So the Americans attack and they're trying to attack, say, Honshu. And so you have this option of sending out your fleet to attack. But remember that some surface ships give you a militia in defense. I think it's a battleship gives you 2 militia in defense.
Couple of them do, yeah.
A couple militia, right? So maybe that's incentivize the person to keep some of them back. I don't know. It's one of those interesting things.
Well, it does. I just don't like the idea of sending out all the sending out a huge fleet to engage in, but then we knew we were going to lose the land battle anyway.
But maybe the idea.
But then the ships are destroyed.
Yeah. Maybe the idea
that doesn't make that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
They didn't leave port with sufficient resources to get further than the port.
It's still really pushing it in my opinion. My gut instinct. Now I want to dig deeper into this, and I'm already going to post some questions about it, because that seems very strange. That's my gut instinct.
Yeah, but also one of the reasons that they impose this. So sometimes designers make a rule not because that's the ultimate goal of what they want to do, but to prevent something else. So perhaps it was something to prevent the Japanese having one sea zone advantage over everybody else, where it's like, okay, now they get to scramble, and now they're here, and now because they're in a position a little bit further ahead, now they can reach a little bit further away to attack the enemy.
Well, I'm thinking more of like along the Chinese coast.
Yeah.
Where you go ahead and you put some ships into port for whatever reason. America's threatening you. China. They scramble on the American turn, and let's say America's got now China and America go separately now.
Yeah.
But let's say America does have troops in China, and they do a Hail Mary, but my fleet moves up. The big heavy hitter Japanese fleet scrambles out to engage it. They end up winning the exchange. They still have some battleships there, but then the American forces did a Hail Mary, took the port that they scrambled out of, even though there are other available ports there for them to go to. And then you're going to say that all those battleships and their supporting craft are just scuttled.
Yeah,
apparently. I don't get that.
Yeah.
And if that is designed that way to stop something else from happening, I really would like to have that explained to me, because that still seems, now, again, maybe it's such a rare thing that it's not that big of a deal, but I already see this one being an issue.
Yep, that's right. Let's move on. So land combat. Defender decides if he wants to scramble eligible fighters from the adjacent zones. Defender decides if his aircraft should participate in combat or not. If he declines combat and keeps his aircraft grounded and loses the combat, so then they are eliminated without fighting back. First strike, attacking and defending units with first strike roll first. Casualties are immediately removed. Air superiority, if there are fighters present on either side, casualties from these units must be taken from opposing aircraft if possible. Attacker rolls for all remaining attacking units. Attacking units that get target selection hit, select which unit the defender must take its casualty. Defender selects remaining casualties and moves them to the side, and they still get to defend. Defender rolls for all remaining defending units. Once defending units that have been taken as casualty make the roll, remove them from the battle board. Defending units that get a target selection hit, select which unit the attacker must take as casualty. An attacker selects and removes remaining casualties from the battle board, and then the attacker has the option to retreat, and then you repeat until the battle is over. So Blitz units that are capable of participating in Blitz can now potentially continue and initiate attacks into adjacent land zones. I would say the only comment I have is under the Blitz, they should say, if the round has been less than 3 rounds, then you can Blitz. I mean, it does cover it right in the next one, but still, I thought it would be worthwhile having it right there. But yeah, maybe not, since it's the right next chapter.
Okay. One thing I do want to point out with land combat. Okay, now there used to be in the overall step of the game, in the way combat phase went, a scramble fighter phase or scramble air units phase.
Yeah.
That no longer exists.
That's true.
It is now based on each combat individually.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Now, there are pros and cons for this from being the attacker and the defender. The defender does not have to commit all their air power before they know what's going on.
Yeah.
It gives them a little more freedom to kind of maybe wait, maybe and again, maybe this is a little bit of a how well do you know your opponent?
Yeah.
Because he may choose the order of combats to make you draw up your fighters.
Yeah.
Because you really want to win this one.
Yeah.
And maybe he doesn't realize that this one looks really important.
Yeah.
But he really thinks, he in his overall strategy considers this one more important.
Yeah.
And if you knew how important he considered this one, you would easily scramble here. Oh no, we got to stop that now. But if you don't know what he's thinking, and this one looks like the more important one, it's more of he picks this combat first, pulls up all your fighters, and then he's like, okay, good. I've got a much stronger chance of winning what I consider the more important combat.
Yeah. Or as the example previously given, the German player attacks Kiev, where those 3 fighters are parked. And now those 3 fighters can't participate in the combat in southern Ukraine. Because if they could have participated in southern Ukraine, they could have scrambled out there, and then they could have landed in, eastern Ukraine and avoided landing in Kiev itself, right? So there's...
Well, no, because, hold on. They have to return to their originating location.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay.
And you know what? I'm starting to have second thoughts whether I agree with that or not. In terms of the actual game mechanics.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Why can't they just have a movement of 1 and just land somewhere else?
Yeah.
Why do they have to go back to their originating
same
area?
thing could apply
now,
to ships too, right?
You can say they have to go back if applicable. However, if it's gone, they have a movement point of 1.
Yeah.
If they don't get to land, they're eliminated.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
But again, maybe I have not had a chance to sit down and just play this shit through. And maybe it'll all click and go, okay, that's the better way to handle it.
I could see it coming up with issues. I genuinely see that. Yeah.
I think it will come up. I think it will be potential. And I can already see this maybe being house ruled quite a bit. But again, I want to reiterate this. The first couple of times I play this game, it is going to be by the book.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, for sure.
By the book. Yeah. I'm not going to presume anything is a problem until I actually, get there. And again, I always reserve the right to be wrong.
Yeah.
And and I may walk away going, oh, turns out, guys, by the way, I talked about this in great detail being what I would see as a potential problem. Turns out it completely works. And here's why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so blitzing now, I think, right?
Yep.
Combat lasts 2 or less rounds. So it used to be 3, wasn't it? Combat lasts 2 rounds or less.
I think it was 3 in version 2.
Oh, okay, that's right.
And then because I remember they actually in version 3, when they got to version 3, they did actually rein in blitz.
Yeah.
Because blitz used to be 1 armor, then you could put like a mechanized and a fighter with it. But now it's 1 armor, 1 unit.
Yeah.
And that was a big kind of nerf to blitzing that happened in version 3.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
And and part of that was reducing the number of rounds that the combat lasted.
Yeah, I see. Just doing some quick math. If 30% or a third of the combat rolls hit in each round of combat, by my calculations, I mean, of course, it's going to vary, but theoretically you could have if the forces are roughly equal. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Never mind. That's impossible to calculate. I was saying like 26% of the defending force would survive, if at all that, right?
If you're a blitzing army or blitzing, one of those nations that does a lot of blitzing.
Yeah.
That's how I'll sum that up. If you're a very blitzing player, you do have to think about this. If you think you're just going to throw in a bunch of tanks and then I'll blitz over here, but you did not throw in enough firepower to make sure you win it in 2 rounds and it screws up your plans.
That's right. Yeah. You do have to think about it.
And I really enjoy that they made it, because 2 rounds, it's not inconceivable that combats go 3 rounds, even with a lot of firepower, because you just roll bad. Yeah. The tanks just got bogged down with city fighting, and every town became a death trap for the tanks, or however you want to visualize it during the fight. Whatever it is, it all boils down to the player who's doing the blitzing really needs to think about how much firepower they put where, and the defender may go, okay, What can he hit me with there? Oh, you know what? I was going to put these 2 extra infantry over here, but I'm going to build them here now because I can look real quick and quickly do a mental calculation of how much firepower I get. And I don't think he's got enough to beat it in 2 rounds.
That's right.
And that is something to think about now,
yes.
Because you do have a time limit. There is a timer for you to be able to blitz.
And a perfect time to mention that our time is down to 1 minute. So we should probably. Okay, catch you in a bit. No commercial break.
Commercial break for.
All right.
All right. Yep, there we go.
Okay, you want to let me record as well. Perfect. All right, so we're back now, and we are still on Blitz. So let's take a look at Blitz. So one thing that they changed, I think they've changed. It's kind of hard for me because sometimes it crosses in my mind. Light armor. Light armor used to be useless. Now it could blitz. And for me, that makes light armor much more interesting to play around with because before it was practically useless. I never built light armor before.
I have seen people use light armor filled a very particular stat niche. In the way it was designed. Now, I think there's a lot to talk about light armor specifically when we get to units.
Sure, yeah.
But the fact that light armor, in and of itself, before we go any sort of deep dive into light armor, the fact that it can now blitz, which a lot of people said they didn't understand why it couldn't, because that's really what the German. Because blitzing was honest to God less about the way the equipment. The technological advancement of the equipment as opposed to how it was utilized on a tactical level.
Is breaking free of World War I mentality.
A lot of people said, why can't light armor blitz? And I've heard that from a lot of people. And of course, the argument was, well, game mechanics and timing and things like that. Well, now you can blitz pretty early, but but light armor is a much different stat block now. But the fact that it can, and again, I'm not going to make any predictions about how this will affect the game until I actually play it. The fact that light armor can blitz and its stats versus that, I think that's a discussion better saved for that. But the fact, but it is worth noting that yes, it has been added to the blitzing list.
Okay, so we have eligible units: light armor, medium armor, including Soviet T-34s, heavy armor, including German Tigers, German Panzer Grenadiers. Now, as a side note, I don't think they should have anything to do with the SS, leave that out, strike it out, shouldn't be part of it. German Panzer Grenadiers, sufficient for me. Units that compare on a 1-to-1 ratio with blitzing armor, mechanized infantry, self-propelled artillery, including Soviet Katyusha rocket artillery, fighters, and tactical bombers. Units that compare on a 2-to-1 ratio with blitzing armor, advanced mechanized infantry. Any comments?
Nope. All that makes sense. And again, like I said, I know this question may come up. It is not, okay, you send in 1 armor, and then with that 1 armor, you can send in a mech, you can send in a self-propelled artillery, you can send in a fighter, you can send in a tactical bomber. It is 1 armor, 1 of those 4 types of units. Because in version 3, armor took they nerfed armor a bit, and I think correctly so, or blitzing a bit. And so that, just to clarify, usually for newer players who might be watching this.
This might be a dumb question, but
probably.
Yeah. So the first portion of the attack is just a regular attack, right? The tanks attacking into the first territory, that's just a regular attack.
Right.
It's the second territory that attacked is a blitz. Now, my dumb question was like, okay, so what if everything else is just doing a regular attack and the tanks are blitzing into the first territory and blitzing into the second? Now, the terminology is really screwy there, right? But my thinking was like, what if you had to pair certain units and they have to be paired from the first attack all the way through to the second? But that's a dumb question.
Not my understanding of how that works.
No, it's not.
My understanding is you make that decision because you don't, because I did ask this question in version 3, and I'm assuming it's the same. You do not have to declare your units are going to blitz until after that first combat is done. So you complete that combat. And at the end of that combat, you say, okay, this armor and this motorized artillery are now going to blitz.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and the way that combat turns out may change the way you think about it. It's like, well, I didn't okay, now that I look, now that I this fight over here, and okay, now I do want to go in with the armor or the artillery. I think getting that first strike, and you do get first strike during the blitz, by the way.
Yeah,
That's worth noting for newer players.
Yeah,
every time there's a combat, regardless of what initiated it, your artillery is going to get first strike.
Yeah. Okay, so into prohibitions: no blitzing into or out of desert, jungle, marsh, tundra, or mountain terrain. Across borders protected by a fortification, after crossing an opposing fortification, or out of cities after an amphibious assault. So, yeah, you can't blitz out of cities. Yeah.
Okay, this is all pretty much the same as I think it was in version 3. There are some pretty hefty restrictions on blitzing, and historically, yeah, that makes sense. That's why the Germans, part of the reason they did so well in Russia is because such huge swaths of that country are perfect for blitzing combat, or the Schwerpunkt style of combat. It's perfect for that. But as soon as you get away from that area, it gets a lot more iffy.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about before is, after crossing an opposing fortification. So this is something that they've clarified in this version, because beforehand it was like, so you enter a territory and now you eliminate the fortification that the enemy had there. So now you can blitz past that point, right? So I like that after crossing an opposing fortification, it clears it up a little bit.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's fair. Examples I think we don't need to talk about them. Border clashes. All right, this is a special form of land combat that can occur over select land zone borders without a declaration of war. Note that in border clashes, the units involved do not actually move into the opposing land zone. They are clashing at the border. And the times that this can happen is Japan versus the USSR at any time except if they signed the Japanese-Soviet non-aggression pact. Or France from Alsace-Lorraine into Germany into Bavaria.
If they sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
If Germany and the USSR sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and Germany has attacked Germany has attacked Poland. So yeah, the Japan, the USSR one is pretty much more or less what it was like in most of the previous versions. The France Germany one is a new addition. It probably won't come up that often because a lot of German players like to knock out France right away. For a lot of reasons. Now, I'm not assuming that's going to stay that way in this edition. That might change.
That's fair.
Maybe there's reasons to go after Poland first and then swing on France. And there's a lot of variables there. If that's not the case, then this probably won't come up that often, to be perfectly honest. Though the fact that it's there is fine, and it kind of makes sense.
Yep. No, that's good. That's good.
Now, either side may attack units on the other side of a jointly held land border in one round of combat. All units must start and end in the bordering land zones. Aircraft may not be brought in from different zones. That's a big nerf for aircraft. Militia may not be used by the attacker. If units participate in a border clash, they may not be moved in the subsequent non-combat movement phase. You cannot conquer land zones in border clashes. So for anybody who's not familiar with border clashes and kind of what their purpose is, generally speaking, a lot of people look at it as a way of weakening an opponent, sucking resources out of them. If you set it up correctly. There are some Russian players who love the idea of going into Japan early with guys just to suck up some infantry, make Japan commit resources up there so they can't commit it to where they really want to go into China, and vice versa. The Japanese player can try to do the same thing to the Russian player by just killing those border units and setting up a stage for a Russian invasion or an invasion of Russia, or two, forcing Russia to have to move units over here to protect and thus weakening it against the German attack. So that's the general concept. If you're not familiar with why border clashes kind of are written the way they are, there's historical stuff there, but mechanically and strategically, that's how most players look at it. And I think these are totally cool. I'm interested to see how the Germany and France one will work out in the long run, but
I think the Germany-France one will be very interesting because the Maginot Line in there as well. It's like, okay, so unless they've tweak that quite a bit as well. But that would be because you used to get double casualties from the Maginot Line, any hits that they
now
made.
my guess is it's mainly designed for the fact that France did technically go into Germany after they invaded Poland.
I think you're right.
But they stood there for a week doing nothing until they went home. And okay, this was fun. I was a very weird part of the war. But what if it wasn't that stupid? What if it wasn't that stupid? And it gives the French player maybe a chance to kind of go, okay, well, do I want to kill some of his infantry now?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Do I want to suck up some of his resources now?
Valid point. Yeah, valid point.
Okay. Now there is one point I want to make about the way that I like the way they summarized border clashes as its own entry. And I think this is going to be even more useful for expansions in the future.
Yep, that's true.
Because now expansions that want to introduce border clashes, they don't have to write their own border clash rules unless there's some sort of historical exception for those border clashes. But the concept of how a border clash works now should be relatively consistent throughout the entire base game and through all the expansions. And if there's an exception, there's an exception. It's just an exception. And it's easy to remember the exception because you understand the core concept of how border clashes work. So I like that they did this with this mechanic, the way that border clashes work.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Let's see. If just thinking through the eyes of an expansion, what if you said partisans worked in a certain way where partisans are equivalent to border clashes within a region, say Ukrainian border clashes fighting against German occupation, something like that. Right?
That might make sense as a way of, okay, we've clarified this concept over here, and we don't have to repeat that concept every time it comes up unless there's an exception. And again, and this goes back to what I was talking about the other week about how one of the nice things Pathfinder did is it made these keywords. And whenever that keyword shows up, you now take that keyword and insert that here, and then you know how it works. You can just keep on playing, and that's it.
That's right.
And if there's an exception because your class can modify that keyword, okay, it works this way, but it's a more powerful version of that keyword. Great. Same thing with border clashes here, and you utilizing them. And you're right, and that's a good example. Well, okay. Partisans fight as if doing a border clash in this instance. However, there's just one or two exceptions because we're talking about partisans.
Yeah. That's right.
I think that's it's setting up a great foundation.
Yeah, that's right. Where people can build on it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, air combat. So special rules for seaplanes. Seaplanes can never participate in land combat and will be eliminated if they are in a captured land zone. Seaplanes can only cause hits to submarines or naval transports. Thus, because naval transports are always chosen as casualties last in combat, a hit by seaplane would not count unless an enemy submarine was present or the only surviving enemy unit was a naval transport. So this is interesting. Seaplanes.
Well, seaplanes deserve their own discussion. However, this is an important rule to put in there in case you had a couple seaplanes and you wanted to throw them against the fleet and just take the long shot and go, oh, I scored 1 out of 4 hit. I said 4 seaplanes on a suicide mission against your fleet, but I scored 1 hit. That's 1 dead transport. Nobody likes that idea, right? I'm not saying that's a good idea, but it really shouldn't be a possibility. It's gaming the system, and it's gaming kind of how seaplanes work. So that's why I feel that's the main reason that exception is in there, and it should be.
Yeah. Well, here's a way to use seaplanes, and this is like super dumb. Okay, so I'm Britain. I build 3 seaplanes. Now's an opportunity to attack the Kriegsmarine. I attack the Kriegsmarine. The Germans scramble 3 aircraft to defend the Kriegsmarine. I bring my seaplanes along. Oh, the Germans, they hit 2 hits on air supremacy round. I take it off on seaplanes. I save myself $12
by having them not hit the. You know what? That's
It's super gaming the system. I mean, maybe there's something else in the rules that avoid that, but I could see that being, and that's not the purpose that seaplanes should be designed for, right?
No, okay, that's worth mentioning as something to keep an eye on. Now, seaplanes still are not cheap. My God, they are not cheap.
No, they're not cheap. But they're what, $8, $6? 7? Yeah, they're not that cheap, but you save yourself. Okay, so maybe not 12. I thought it was 6 for some reason. And I thought
But I
fighters are 12
get
for
what you're
some
saying.
reason. Yeah.
Can they be used as soak off in an important air battle?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't build them specifically for that purpose. You'd build them for other reasons and be like, hey, I'm going to bring them along this time and I'm going to use them. So they might make a rule saying, well, they might not be eligible. They might not be eligible units to take off in the first round of combat, under the air supremacy round, right? Let me take a quick look what it says there.
Yeah, I'm scrolling down to that right now too.
So it says in a first round of combat, casualties by units with air superiority must be assigned first to enemy aircraft present in that battle. So far it doesn't say.
Okay, under seaplanes can only hit submarines and ports, may engage in port attacks, map against subs. Yeah, it does not say anything explicitly about seaplanes not being able to be targeted, like by air superiority.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not gonna. I get what you're saying. It's something to maybe keep an eye on.
Yeah,
as a potential abuse. Now, on the other hand, maybe it comes up so rarely. Yeah. Again, kind of maybe with the land hopping thing.
Yeah.
Said, it's not really. We don't really.
No, and they could be right.
Maybe this will be the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's worth noting. But it is worth making a note and putting an asterisk and say, we'll keep an eye on that one.
So initially I thought with seaplanes, like, okay, so you could build a couple of those and, there's an enemy fleet parked here. So I'm going to suicide bomb my seaplanes to charge after this enemy. Let's say, I don't know, a good example. Japan built some seaplanes because the American transports are approaching, and they're going to suicide bomb and go with just 4 seaplanes and attack that fleet of American fleet, right? And just since they could only target hits against enemy transports, just wipe out some enemy transports. Now, they can't do it because the only surviving unit has to be a naval transport.
Right.
So you could suicide bomb against enemy submarines, but that's not going to be cost effective.
No, I don't think it will be.
Yeah. So
and you still have to be on map. So,
you still,
Yeah.
Anyways, moving on. Special rules for air transports must be the last unit selected as casualties, except on the first round of combat as the attacker when participating in an airborne assault, and when subject to hits by anti-aircraft, artillery, or air superiority. So only by attacker. See, I don't know how this is written. It's like the first round of combat as the attacker when participating in the airborne assault, and when subject to hits by anti-aircraft artillery or air superiority. Are they both? Like you have to be an attacker.
Air transports must be the last unit selected as casualties, except on first round of combat as the attacker.
And everything following is the attacker, or is it only the following sentence?
And when subject to hits by anti-aircraft artillery or air superiority. And okay, I think what they're saying is you attack with 3 fighters.
Yeah.
You attack and an air transport.
Yeah.
Air superiority, your opponent gets 4 hits. Yeah. My God, they roll like a god. That's 1, 2, 3, 4th hit.
That's the way I read it. Yeah.
And now if he didn't die on that first round of now let's say you only got 3 fighters go away, that guy now stays in that combat. And if all the land units get wiped out, he gets ultimately wiped out as well. But if they don't and they retreat, then he retreats with them.
But he could also take him off as an air transport. You could take off the air transport as the casualty in the first round and save one of your fighters.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't. Yeah. Because it's selected as casualties, except on the first as attacker. Yeah. So
and then the defender never gets to take it as casualty unless it's the last unit in combat. That's my read of this situation. Because somebody could look at it and say whenever it says and when subject to hits by anti-aircraft artillery, they could say, oh no, this is applicable to both.
And this also plays into an issue that I know is creeping up with the rules where somebody would attack somebody has a couple aircraft in the zone, they attack with just AA.
Yeah, I've done that.
And the rules did allow it at one point, but that's why some of the AA rules, and that's why the defender now can choose not to set up his air units. Because if he's just setting it, let's say he just builds 3 AA, sends it into he for whatever reason,
Oh yeah.
Extreme example. Sure. He starts rolling, 9 dice just to kill your aircraft on a suicide run. Well, that's pretty bullshit. No, the defender would really sit there. Yeah, but I've got like 18 infantry here, so they just shoot you as you cross the battle lines.
Yeah.
And my fighters don't even scramble because they're like, dude, no.
Yeah, that was one of those hidden things.
We're not going to do that. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why they gave the defender the option to not even raise his aircraft during the combat as a way of avoiding that.
It's good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think this is part and parcel of kind of that same mentality. Airborne assault. An airborne assault or strategic bomb transport, an airborne transport, or strategic bomber may transport one airborne infantry unit into an airborne assault. A heavy air transport may transport 2 airborne units into an airborne assault. An airborne assaulting unit cannot retreat from combat, no matter the circumstances. Airborne assault combat sequence. Defender decides if he wants to scramble eligible fighters from adjacent zones. Basically, it works like normal combat from there. I'm not quite sure why this got its own section.
It's a bit different. It's different, right? Like air superiority, if there are fighters present, casualties are taken. Defender rules for anti-aircraft fire. If a transport aircraft is chosen as casualty in step 4 or 5, its airborne infantry is eliminated before it can participate in combat.
You see, I still think you could have rolled this into the main combat sequence, and it would have been okay. Now, yeah, I just don't. I just think that maybe would have made more sense, because now you're going to get people trying to combine those 2 combat sequences into one. Anyway, when they send in an airborne assault along with a ground assault.
Yeah, that's right.
But it basically works the same with 1 or 2, as far as I can see.
Sure.
Maybe I'm missing something. A couple modifications.
Well, no, that's right.
Strategic bombing. This has changed a bit. I believe this has changed a bit. Medium and strategic bombers may carry out strategic bombing of facilities. Such bombing does not destroy IPPs, but damages facilities instead. Note, damaged facilities have reduced capabilities or may even be rendered entirely useless. Combat sequence. Attacker decides if he wants to send escorting fighters with the bombers. Defender decides if he wants to send interception fighters. Refer to 10.6.3, which should be the next one. Yeah. If the defender decides to send intercepting fighters, 1 round of interception combat occurs using the interception values for intercepting fighters, escorting fighters, and bombers. Casualties are removed from the battle board. Attacker rolls strategic damage for surviving bombers. Facility is marked as damaged. Defender rolls for inherent facility anti-aircraft artillery. 1 die per attacking bomber, up to an unlimited number, not up to 3 like normal anti-aircraft artillery unit. Clarification, that's an important one. Anti-aircraft artillery units in the land zone do not defend against strategic bombing. Attacker selects and removes casualties. Attacker lands his aircraft. Okay. Now, there's some caveats to this that I wasn't even aware of until more recently. Interception, to intercept, you do not need an air base to intercept.
Oh no, you don't. Well, I guess you wouldn't know.
If that all planes within the attack zone,
that's right. That's right.
If you have an air base in that zone, then those intercepting fighters can intercept that zone or into adjacent zones.
Okay, gotcha.
And that was a caveat that I had not realized about version 3 in the way it was worded until recently. In a discussion I had with somebody else. And I'm like, that changes things. So you don't need a plethora of air bases.
No,
they simply expand your capability of
adjacent
webbing out overlapping defenses.
That's right.
Also, for newer players, you do the AA aircraft of the facility does not fire until after the damage is done. So you are, if you get past the interception phase in combat, you will damage the facility. You will damage the facility, barring there being some other factor involved, like the advanced construction technology. You will damage the facility. Then you see how many casualties you take out of after the damage is applied. That's for newer players. I think more experienced players understand this. Strategic rockets can also be used for strategic bombing, but are never subject to interception. If the defender has not developed radar technology, inherent facility anti-aircraft artillery may not fire. If the defender has developed radar technology, the defender rolls for inherent AA aircraft artillery, 1 die per attacking strategic rocket, up to an unlimited number. If a strategic rocket is hit, the strategic bombing fails, no damage is done. The attacker, now here's an exception to what I just said. If you have the radar technology and you are firing at strategic rockets, those do get shot down before they land.
Yeah.
So that's already one exception to what I just said, and it's an important one. If a strategic rocket is hit, the fails, and no damage is done. The attacker rolls 1d6 damage for every surviving strategic rocket. Facility damage is marked. Strategic rockets are destroyed after a single use. Facilities have a maximum damage value after which they cannot be further damaged. Thank God. Special rules for strategic bombing of railroads. Railroads do not have inherent anti-aircraft artillery. After rolling for strategic damage, the attacker chooses one of the borders of the targeted land zone to apply the damage to. The terrain on the border of the railroad is the terrain on the border. The terrain on the border of the railroad, I think it should say of the railroad, determines. Wait, are you reading this too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I get, it's just clearly there was some fat fingering going on here. Determines the maximum damage value. Refer to 13.2.8. The attacker needs only to be at war with the owner of the attacked land zone.
Yeah, railroads are confusing in some ways.
Actually, I do have needs to be at war with the owner. Okay, I do have a question that is popping into my mind.
What's that?
Let's say you have a neutral territory and it runs into a city and you want to maybe cut, well, I don't, maybe that's a bad example, but let's say you are at war with, here's a nation you're at war with. Here's a nation you're not at war with. You choose to bomb a facility on the border between those two nations.
Right.
The rail facility.
Yeah.
On the border between those two nations. This side of the border that you bombed is regular terrain, or flat. There's no terrain features. The other side of the border is mountainous. For repairing costs, is it considered flat or is it considered mountainous?
So I've talked about this a few times, and I haven't met. I mean, I don't know if I'm just explaining myself wrong, but people just did not get what I was trying to say. Is I'm building a rail facility. I'm building a rail on a border. Now there's mountain here, there's jungle here, and there's plains here. What's the cost that I have to pay? Because I'm building it on the border. What's the cost I have to pay? Because
now I will add that the way you build rail facilities now is different than I think it used to be.
Yeah.
However, this rule here still begs that question.
Yeah. And I did not get a straight answer whatsoever. They just either didn't understand me because I was not making myself clear enough. But it's like jungle, plains, doesn't matter. You just build it on what the terrain of the border is. It's like, well, it's on the black line directly in the middle between the border. It's not on anything. It's jungle here. It's half and half. What does it do? Do I split the difference? It's like, what is it? $2 for plains and $4 for maybe $6 for jungle. Yeah. Do I split the difference and say it's $3? Or whatever, $4, or what do I do?
And I know my group always said is just go with whatever the more difficult terrain is.
That's what I would. That's what I would do.
I think that's a simpler way to put it. Even if, and the argument can be made, even if, like in the example I just said, a nation you're at peace with, but a nation you're at war with, but you're technically bombing the border border part.
Yeah.
You still have to repair the facilities leading into the mountainous terrain.
Sure. Yeah.
So you still got to pay the extra cost. However, I could see it kind of being argued the other way too. And this does kind of create a little bit of a confusion.
Yeah. And when I read this, is the terrain on the border of the railroad is determine the maximum damage value. So it's like, okay, so if yeah. Anyways, let's not get into it.
And you only need to be at war with the owner of the attacked land zone. Now that does imply that it's whatever land zone you're hitting.
Yeah.
But yeah. it's still it's a little weird. It's a little weird, and it feels a little like it doesn't quite jive.
Yeah. Like if you have a railway line between, yeah. Anyways, railroads are interesting because they're like
when I get the
on
chance,
the border between two different things.
I'll pose the question directly.
Yeah. It's like railways are partial ownership of two territories, and so therefore they're difficult to define exactly what they are. So
I think, and I think they should just have. I think they should. I understand. I think they should just have rail marshaling yards. I think they should.
Yeah,
I would redesign the way rails work to have something called rail marshaling yards.
Yeah,
and I think that would help.
Well, for thematic purposes, I like what they have here now. But you're right. It's like you could say, okay, this Bavarian land zone, they have railway lines leading all the way up to the border of all the borders that they surround. Now, if Austria also has a rail marshaling zone, then they have railways connected to all the borders all around. Okay, and so now you can rail between those territories. And that's one way of approaching it, where it's not which border are they on, is like, do they have a rail marshaling, do they have a railway network in this territory or not? And if both of them do, then there's a railway connection between. And if they don't, then there's no connection between the two. But I do like it for thematic purposes this way.
Yeah, and seeing the actual rail lines on the map is cool. However, it is also there are reasons for the way it's currently worked to try and get behind, like in Russia, for example, try to get behind and take territories to actually sever the ability to transport.
Right.
And so if you do it the way I initially think to do it, that might get rid of some of that. And I don't want to get rid of that. I think that's good.
Yeah, it's a nice thing.
But anyway, that's a different discussion.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Interception combat. Players subject to strategic one thing I do want to add about strategic bombing is and I know I believe it's there's an example here that clarifies it somewhere. If all sources of strategic damage against a particular facility are kind of rolled together. So, and I did ask this question specifically, and I believe I'm interpreting it correctly, so if you have a heavy bomb, if you've got a strat bomber and a rocket hitting the facility together, you don't roll 2d12 and then subtract the damage, and then 1d6 and then subtract the damage if you have the improved technology.
Right.
You just pick up all the damage dice, roll them together in one shot, and then subtract the damage from that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Why does it matter?
Because the other way, the original way I said is you're doubling the effectiveness of the damage reduction.
There's damage reduction?
I'm saying, for example, if you have improved construction.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay, I get you.
So you would actually put all the sources of damage against one facility together, and you'd run that as one combat.
Yeah, no, I get you.
So if I'm bombing if I have a rocket against this facility, same zone, I've got a rocket going here, a rocket going here, and a heavy bomber and a rocket going somewhere else. That's three separate combats.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I get you. Yeah. Okay, interception. I think this will be the last little subchapter, and then we have to call it a day. It's already been a long enough gathering, and the time is ticking away at us. And yeah, so we'll end with interception and pick it up next time with port attack. So
players subject to strategic bombing may send interception fighters against the attacking units. Eligible defending units. Fighters up to an unlimited number in the land zone containing the facility being strategically bombed. Fighters in an adjacent land zone to the facility being strategically bombed with an air base. Same limitations as scrambling apply. Fighters on a heavy fleet carrier in an adjacent sea zone to the facility being strategically bombed if radar technology is developed. Combat lasts for one combat round only, where all aircraft participating at a reduced values, all casualties are removed at the end of the interception combat. So, I mean, that's pretty much how it works now, with a couple other caveats thrown in there for version 4.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's right. Okay, that about covers that then. Yes. So next time we'll pick it up in part 2 for combat, and there's still quite a bit. There's naval combat.
There is. And I really want to take some time with these port attacks because they're very different.
Yeah, they are. It's a new mechanic, and I think it wouldn't do it justice to just tag it on the end here with only 3 minutes, 4 minutes on the clock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, I will talk to you later, Wintermute, and next week sometime, or
Cool.
whatever it is.
Yep. We will see everybody later.